Is this whole coaching search just one big sham? We answer that question here on Patscast.
Wheels out, the season fell flat. Kraft's on a mission, no time to chat.
Welcome to Patscast. I'm Brad Whitaker. Good to be with you. There seems to be a consensus now that Mike Vrabel will probably become the next head coach of the New England Patriots after Jerod Mayo's firing on Sunday. Vrabel, we found out today, is set to interview with Robert Kraft and company this Thursday. But believe it or not, the Patriots have already interviewed two candidates for the head coaching role, Byron Leftwich and Pep Hamilton. I think we all know what's going on there. But I'll get to Vrabel in just a second. It's worth going through the exercise. Byron Leftwich and Pep Hamilton. We'll start with Leftwich. He was the former offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, perhaps better known as an NFL quarterback who spent most of his career with the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Pittsburgh Steelers, was the OC there for 4 seasons and won a Super Bowl with Tom Brady, but he was ultimately fired in 2023 because Todd Bowles was upset with how he managed the run game. But Leftwich essentially ran the no-risk-it, no-biscuit, vertical-oriented Bruce Arians offense until Brady arrived, and then it became kind of a hybrid of the two. He still kind of ran a lot of the vertical stuff with Godwin and Evans out there and Brady and his ability to throw downfield, but incorporated a lot of the stuff from New England, pre-motion, quick releases, taking advantage of mismatches. And that's a good thing. I mean, he is an adaptable offensive coordinator. He's not ideological like, say, Alex Van Pelt, who just really wanted that wide zone thing to work all season long, and it just never did. But is he really going to be the next head coach of the New England Patriots? I don't think so. So let's look at Pep Hamilton right now. He's a less familiar name. Was a quarterback's coach with Cleveland, Houston, and Indianapolis before ultimately becoming the offensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts. He served in that role for 3 seasons between 2013 and 2015, and he was a big part of Andrew Luck's development. And remember when Andrew Luck first came to the NFL, the Colts just seemed to get a little bit better every year. I think they made the playoffs his rookie year. They made the wild card game and worked his way up each year, I think an additional round, all the way to the AFC Championship game, which they ultimately lost, I believe, to the New England Patriots. But, you know, his development of Andrew Luck is huge. And considering Drake May, this is a good guy that you really want to interview. Unfortunately, he does not really have any NFL head coaching experience. He does have some head coaching experience. His last gig was with the XFL's DC Defenders in 2020, the second iteration of the XFL, not the current iteration that turned into the UFL, the second iteration that was cut short because of COVID. He went 3-2 that season, so take from that what you will as a head coach, Pep Hamilton. Seems like a bit of a leap, though, from head coach in the XFL, never had a job, only did 5 games, and now he's going to be the head coach in the New England Patriots. I don't see it coming, but interesting thing about Pep Hamilton, this guy just loves Joe Milton. He was on some television network a few months ago, I think back in September, and was asked to rank the 5 best quarterbacks under 25, and it went in this order: C.J. Stroud, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, and then Joe Milton. Take that with a grain of salt. He had Brock Purdy and Trevor Lawrence on that list, but clearly loves Joe Milton. Didn't have Drake May on there, didn't have Caleb Williams, didn't have Jaden Daniels. Now, this was before the season, but Joe Milton was considered the 3rd string, maybe even 4th string quarterback for the Patriots at that time, and he was saying he's a top 5 quarterback under 25. I mean, I think we all know Drake May is the franchise quarterback of the future, but if you want a quarterback controversy, Pep Hamilton is the guy to go with. But he does have a pretty impressive background, and considering what he did with Andrew Luck, having him on that staff would be huge for Drake May. Just, I'm not sure as a head coach. But like I said, we all know the real reason the Patriots did this, and it was to satisfy the Rooney Rule, which requires teams to interview 2 minority candidates before making a decision. Seems like they're just checking a box here, especially doing this before Vrabel even has his interview. They're getting it out of the way early. That way Vrabel can come in and maybe they ultimately give him the job. That's what I'm thinking, but that doesn't mean they won't find a position on the team. And I'm actually glad that the Patriots did these 2 interviews, not just to satisfy the Rooney Rule, but because, the point of the Rooney Rule is not just to create more minority head coaches, it's to expose minority head coaches to other organizations, to bridge new networks. They can find jobs somewhere else. Maybe they interview for a head coach job, but they'll find an OC or a position coach job, ultimately with that same organization, or another one that has connections with the organization they interviewed for. And I could see both of these guys, or one of these guys, on the staff this season. And like I said about Pep Hamilton, with what he did with Andrew Luck, that seems like a good fit with Drake May. And would I be thrilled if Byron Leftwich was the next offensive coordinator? Probably not, but, he wasn't bad. And if he was on the staff in some sort of capacity, I would love to have him there. So, especially when you consider this team with Drake May and the fact that they're trying to find their identity on offense. They've been going back and forth between whether we're a power run or a wide zone team. The more offensive minds you have on that coaching staff, the better. So I think these are 2 decent candidates, but probably not for head coaching roles. So it seems like the Patriots were just checking a box there. Something that I'm actually a little surprised about, Brian Flores, who's now the defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings, has expressed his interest in potentially being the head coach for the New England Patriots. Now, the Pats haven't reached out to him for an interview yet, but I do find this a bit of a surprise after how things ended last time Brian Flores was in New England, or after he left New England. If you remember, he was part of the coaching interview process. He was one of the candidates to become the head coach of the New York Giants, which ultimately went to Brian Daboll. Well, Brian Daboll had his interview with the Giants, and Brian Flores was next to be interviewed by the Giants. Before Flores had even had his interview, Bill Belichick texted Brian Daboll saying, "Congratulations on getting the New York Giants job." Well, unfortunately, Belichick texted the wrong Brian, and it went to Brian Flores instead, who hadn't interviewed with the Giants yet, which just proved that was a coaching sham altogether. It led to lawsuits. It was a whole issue. So I'm a little bit surprised. I don't think Flores has burned bridges with the Patriots organization, but he certainly burned bridges with Belichick, and even going back to the Patriots probably would leave a bad taste in his mouth. But he's a guy I really want them to interview, and I hope they do. I'm not sure I'd put him ahead of Johnson or Vrabel, but I would certainly consider it, especially with what he's done as a defensive coordinator for Minnesota, what he did in Pittsburgh previously. I know it didn't work out really well in Miami with Tua. Hopefully he's learned from that. But remember what Flores did as defensive coordinator for the Pats. He was the DC during that dominant Super Bowl performance against the LA Rams, the last Super Bowl title that the Patriots had. I know that was Belichick's scheme ultimately, but it was Brian Flores' doing, implementing those adjustments that they made against the LA Rams that ultimately won them the Super Bowl. I'm skeptical about him being a head coach again, but he's certainly earned his stripes since he stopped being the head coach in Miami, and I think deserves another shot. So I'm shocked that the Pats haven't reached out to him yet for an interview. Obviously, at this point, they've satisfied the Rooney Rule, so if they were to reach out to him, it would be in good faith and not to just check a box. And I hope they do. I hope they, even if they intend on hiring Mike Vrabel, it's worth talking to Brian Flores, because I think he's come a long way, and hopefully he's learned from what happened in Miami with Tua, that whole situation there. He'll get a head coaching job at some point, even if it's not this next season. Again, I'll get back to Mike Vrabel in just a minute, but in reality, if it's not already Mike Vrabel's job, it's a two-man race between him and Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. And the Patriots reached out to Johnson requesting an interview, and he accepted. He's set to interview sometime during this week. Remember, the Detroit Lions, they're on a bye right now since they clinched the number 1 seed in the NFL playoffs. I'm not sure which day he will interview, but he is going to interview with the Pats, which is good. And he really is the intriguing high-ceiling option with arguably the most creative offense in the NFL. And what I like about it, similar to what I said about Byron Leftwich, but to an even greater extent, his offensive style is not ideological. It incorporates a ton of things. It mixes power and zone schemes, lots of pre-snap motion, creates a lot of mismatches, relies heavily on play action, very aggressive, loves to go for it on fourth down. Now, I don't know how much of that is Ben Johnson because that's ultimately Dan Campbell's call, but I don't know. It didn't seem like it was Gerard Mayo's call when he was the head coach and when Alex Van Pelt was running the offense, so I don't really know, but since he's taken over as OC, he's certainly been aggressive under Dan Campbell. And he's not as keen on, timing-based short throws like you'd see in a West Coast offense or even the quick-release short routes that we saw with Tom Brady over the years. It's much more of a vertical offense. And with Drake May in mind, with his arm strength, it seems like Ben Johnson's an incredible choice, right? I mean, look what he's done with Jared Goff. And it's hard to compare Drake May with Jared Goff right now because Goff's been in the league for a while. May is just coming off of his rookie season, but I think it's safe to say when all is said and done, Drake May probably has a lot more potential than Jared Goff, who I think has kind of hit his ceiling at this point. He's a good quarterback, don't get me wrong, but I think Drake May has the potential to be a real superstar in this league. Ben Johnson's the guy who can really take advantage of that and bring Drake May to the next level. That said, I really have trouble believing he will get the job unless he just absolutely blows the Crafts away, since they would be hiring another first-year head coach. He would have to essentially say, I'm going to bring in a lot of experienced coaches, perhaps some that have been head coaches before, but, we had Ben McAdoo on staff. He was a head coach before with the New York Giants. It didn't seem to make much of a difference with Gerard Mayo. You're taking another risk there with Ben Johnson, even if he is far more qualified for the job than Gerard Mayo was when he took over. But there are rumors also Mark Brunell, who's the current quarterbacks coach for the Detroit Lions, would be his offensive coordinator. You have to remember Mark Brunell was the most critical analyst of Tom Brady during Deflategate. He actually cried on ESPN talking about it. Remember that? He cried talking about Tom Brady and how disappointed he was in deflating the footballs. I don't think that's a great fit in New England. Not talking about Ben Johnson, but Ben Johnson taking Mark Brunell as his offensive coordinator after that would be pretty funny, but Johnson would certainly be the ones calling plays, right? It's not going to be Mark Brunell. Wherever Ben Johnson goes, he's going to be like Sean McVay. He's going to be the head coach and essentially the offensive coordinator. It's going to be like Alex Van Pelt back when he was with Cleveland. Kevin Stefanski called all the plays. AVP just had the title of OC, ran the offense that way, but it was ultimately up to Stefanski. That would be the same way with Ben Johnson. There is reason to bring a head coach like that to the Patriots. I mean, he seems like the modern NFL choice. But in my opinion, with the defense struggling the way it has, a quarterback that can make plays in any scheme like Drake May does not need a genius offensive coordinator to be successful in this league. I mean, if he had one, he'd perhaps be even better, but looking at how much the defense regressed this past year, it seems like that might be the priority, is just kind of restoring that defensive culture in New England, especially now that you have Drake May. As long as you bring in a coaching staff on the offensive side of the football that does have some experience, I think they're going to prefer to hire Mike Vrabel, especially with his connection to New England, his desire to return. I would be shocked if it's ultimately Ben Johnson, but I'm glad that they're going through the process, and I'm glad that he's interested. It seems like the Patriots are the number one job at this point. It's either them or it's the Chicago Bears. The Bears have Caleb Williams. Patriots have Drake May. I think Drake May's better, but, Caleb Williams had a rough year, was poorly coached too, so it's hard to tell. Certainly he has a more talented roster in Chicago than the Patriots have, but ownership's a mess. The whole organization's been a mess. Patriots have all the cap space in the world, the 4th overall draft pick. I see why Ben Johnson is interested, but Mike Vrabel seems like the obvious choice. All right, he's one of the brightest coaches, one of the brightest coaching minds in the NFL. He understands the rule book inside and out. Ted Johnson said Vrabel was the smartest player that he ever played with, and it wasn't even close. That was his quote. It wasn't even close. And I know some Patriots fans that really like Ben Johnson, they're worried about Mike Vrabel because they think it's just a reversion back to Bill Belichick, but just because Mike Vrabel's a hard ass doesn't mean he doesn't connect with players. I mean, first of all, Bill Belichick connected with players more than I think he got credit for, but Mike Vrabel is more of a drill sergeant coach than a players coach, but that doesn't mean players wouldn't want to play for him. And he does connect with players. He's just, he's a tough coach. He's a tough coach, and I think that's the cultural fit for the New England Patriots. This is not a players coach vibe destination. It's cold. It's brutal. The taxes are high. Why would anyone who wants to be comfortable go play for the New England Patriots? No, you go play in Arizona, or you go play in Miami, or you play in SoFi Stadium in LA, or you play in a dome, or you do something like that. You don't go to the New England Patriots. And that was my biggest issue with the Gerard Mayo promotion to head coach. And it wasn't so much that I didn't think he was ready. I really didn't know if he was ready or not. I was happy with the way the defense had been playing with him and Steve Belichick running it. Well, Bill Belichick was still there. But he was hired as a player's coach because Bill Belichick was a big meanie. And that's what the Kraft said. If we just get rid of Belichick and then plop Gerard Mayo there, everything's going to be all better. And it was a complete disaster. You can't have a player's coach in Foxborough. It just doesn't make sense. You need a hard-nosed, to the grindstone, Mike Vrabel style coach, and that's why I think he really is the best fit. And he's not like Bill Belichick. Like I said, he's had great success hiring staff, including Matt LaFleur, Arthur Smith, both as offensive coordinators under Vrabel, both became head coaches, and his upbringing as a coach, not as a player, but as a coach, is very different from what Bill Belichick did. He was a defensive position coach at Ohio State. He was a defensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. And then he spent this past year learning as much as he can to be a better coach on the offensive side of the football as a consultant for the Browns. This is not plug and play Bill Belichick philosophy. He's been brought up under different systems than Belichick was brought up in, and things are going to look a little bit different. In my opinion, I think this is all but a done deal. I think Mike Vrabel is going to be the next head coach of the New England Patriots. I think this is, and I mentioned this before, this is the Bobby Valentine to John Farrell transition that we saw with the Boston Red Sox in the 2010s. Obviously, Bobby Valentine had a lot more managerial experience than Gerard Mayo had coaching experience, but it was similar in the fact that they were one-and-done coaches that didn't make any sense and were a complete disaster, whereas John Farrell was a guy who had connections with the Red Sox organization before, was a pitching coach, I believe, and I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but John Farrell ended up being a great manager for Boston, and they won a World Series, they made the postseason multiple times, and I don't know why John Farrell was fired. In hindsight, he was just as good of a manager as Alex Cora. Like, they basically have identical records. I think Farrell's teams might have made the postseason more than Alex Cora's teams. But, okay, that's enough Red Sox talk. Maybe I need to start another podcast on that. But I think that's a similar situation. One and done, head coach, didn't make any sense. Let's move on. Let's start over. Let's bring in a guy who's going to bring in something different but has roots to the organization. That is Mike Vrabel, and I think he could be in New England for many, many years to come and be highly successful. But I think the Pats, let's be honest, especially banging out the Rooney Rule right off the bat, they are purposely rushing through this process. They are only interviewing Ben Johnson because he's the other high-profile candidate and probably worth taking seriously, and I think the Krafts will take him seriously, but really, they've had their eyes on Mike Vrabel for quite some time now. And, I could be wrong. If the Krafts do decide to interview Brian Flores, especially now that the Rooney Rule doesn't factor in, that'll be an indicator that this is a real coaching search, that they really are looking elsewhere to see who the next leader of that coaching staff should be. But as far as I know, there really aren't any indications the Patriots want to interview Flores. And if they're just going to go, we got the two minority candidates, we'll interview Ben Johnson because he's the hot candidate right now, but we really want Vrabel, I think that's what they're doing. They're just rushing through this process. Similar to how they rushed through the process last year, elevating Gerard Mayo. Now, they didn't have to do a coaching search last year because they wrote it into his contract. They found some loophole, but, you know, I think there's a safe chance that Vrabel's going to be the next head coach. The only reason I think Vrabel might not get hired, well, there's two reasons, okay? One, Ben Johnson goes in there, absolutely blows them away. I'm going to bring in all these veteran coaches. I'm going to bring in all these former head coaches. Here's what we're going to do on offense. Here's what we're going to do on defense. Here's what I'm going to do with Drake May. He blows the Crafts away. I could potentially see that happening. It's unlikely, but it could happen. But the real reason is Tom Brady could recruit him to Las Vegas. Antonio Pierce was fired by the Raiders today. Tom Brady obviously is good friends with Mike Vrabel. They played together for many years. And Brady's now an owner of the Raiders and plans to have heavy involvement in their new head coaching search. So that's the only reason I think Vrabel might not go with the Patriots, is because he's really enticed by Tom Brady and what they're doing in Vegas. But based on what happened in Mike Vrabel's Patriots Hall of Fame induction ceremony, his halftime speech saying there aren't many places like this, talking about New England, his relationship with Bob Kraft, I think it's obvious. This is not a real coaching search. The Pats have penciled in Vrabel for at least a week now. And my prediction right now is Mike Vrabel interviews Thursday and will be named the head coach on Friday. Hell, he might be named the head coach by Thursday night. And then he'll have his press conference Monday or Tuesday next week. And we'll be moving on. That's my prediction, but let me know if you disagree or agree in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube. Be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, or subscribe if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And we'll see you very soon.
Wheels out, the season fell flat. Crafts on a mission, no time to chat. Interviews are flying, the rumors run high. But is this a search or is Vrabel the guy? Byron Leftwich brought the ring with Tom. Pep Hamilton's vision kept QB strong. Ben Johnson's creative, a modern design. But all signs point to Vrabel this time. Patcast, is it Vrabel's time to shine? Will he bring the grit to the Pats front line? Ben's got the brains, but it's tough to ignore. Vrabel's the heart of New England folklore. Flores is watching, the sidelines stay cold, but the Crafts seem to know where the story is told. Vrabel's connection runs Patriots deep, a culture of toughness the team will keep. From Nashville to Cleveland, his path refined. He's studied it all, his approach aligned. With the rule book mastered, the players engaged. Vrabel's return feels like the next